Hello, everybody. I just thought I would make a video and describe what I experienced at the march on January 6th in Washington, D.C. One, because that way I don't have to tell the story 100 times, as I've already told it dozens of times on the phone to a lot of people, but also just to capture some of the history from my perspective as someone who was there on the ground with my own eyes on what I observed. And I'm also somebody who has attended 3 Trump rallies in the past between 2018 and the 2020 election cycles. I also attended the March for Trump in D.C. on November 14th, the March for Trump and the Jericho March in D.C. on December 12th, the Stop the Steal rally in Atlanta, and the Valdosta, Georgia Trump rally, where he was speaking for Loeffler and Perdue, campaigning for them there. So I was asked the day before the march by a Breitbart reporter while we were at the stage to, what it was that I was expecting to accomplish from the march. And so I guess a good place to start would be, kind of backing up, because it relates to what the motivations were of people there. But when I was asked that question, my response is that there were a couple of possible outcomes. They may have been long shots, but, I think like most of I would say about 2 million people there. I've heard estimates that there were anywhere, some of the low end of the estimates obviously are like under 100,000 in the media, but with my eyes, I'd say it was about 2 million. And then I've even seen some numbers that say it was over 3 million, which wouldn't surprise me, but it was definitely over 1 million. But in terms of what I was expecting, there was Ted Cruz advocating to pause the process and delay it for a week or two to give some more time to look at the evidence. Maybe that would result in then reconvening the debate or sending it back even to the state legislatures to reconsider their certification of the electors in their states. So that was one possibility, and maybe that was a long shot. But, that's why we put people on the ground there to try to, create a voice and advocate for what might have been a long shot outcome. Obviously, a second possibility would be to, find that there was clear evidence of fraud that I think that all of the people that were there obviously believe, and send it to a contingent election in the House. I didn't have a lot of confidence in that anyway, thinking that we wouldn't, that the Republicans in the House, even though we had the numbers there for a contingent election, wouldn't really stand up. And I think so I never had a lot of confidence, even if we were able to get to that outcome of the 6th. We're just sending it back to the state legislatures, and I know some of them had even written letters to Congress saying that they wanted time to reconsider the certification of the electors in their states. So, and worst case scenario, I guess at a minimum, the objective of putting a couple million people there was so that we would at least engage in 10 or 12 hours of debate with 4 million eyeballs outside, creating some additional level of accountability, creating a situation that the media couldn't ignore, creating a situation where the voters that these representatives supposedly represent were there in person, and hopefully it would help to inspire them to look more closely at things and not just gloss over the evidence that was being presented. So those are 4 expectations of what the outcome could have been. So, and I think from what the people, I spoke to a lot of people in the crowd, and I've spoken to a lot of people over the last couple of months, and I think that's pretty consistently what people want. They wanted transparency, they wanted that debate to happen, they wanted the evidence to be presented, and they wanted it to be done in a forum where the observation of the voters couldn't be ignored. And so they created that situation. I mean, I was prepared to stay outside of the Capitol building for the 10 or 12 hours that, could have been the resulting debate if there were 2 hours of debate in each of the chambers of Congress on each of the states that were objected to. So the thought was, we'll stay there all night. And I think most people, and a lot of people probably didn't even have hotel rooms. They bussed in, and their plan was to, stay there and then bus out. What were the objectives of the other side, of Nancy Pelosi, of Mitch McConnell, of Mike Pence, Chuck Schumer, and the others, and Joe Biden, and the others who wanted to just, make this ceremonial confirmation of the electoral vote? I think, their objective was to certify the electoral vote for Biden, and to do it with as limited amount of debate and as limited a exposure of the facts and the evidence of fraud, and limiting the presentation and visibility of that as much as they could. And at the same time, looking at it in hindsight now of the way that things played out, eroding the support of Trump and shaming his supporters. And I'm sure that clearly that happened. I mean, I had text messages from family members by the time I got back to my hotel room at 4 p.m., saying they were ashamed. So it worked in that respect. And, those weren't family members it was a combination of some who were conservative, but obviously some who, were probably already ashamed of me, frankly. But I think they played their hand perfectly in terms of the outcomes. And they managed to send everybody home and get rid of the 2 million people who were there, and then actually reconvene and do their business in the middle of the night. It's eerily reminiscent of the way that the votes were counted in the states that are in question, frankly. Send the observers home, and then do it at a point when, people at that point a lot of people had probably gone to bed and weren't even watching the broadcast anymore, or had already been demoralized based on what they had heard at around a little after 1 o'clock from Mike Pence's press release. But so just what I observed on the day I got there a couple nights before and participated in the Freedom Plaza event that was there the night before, and it was heavily faith-based. I mean, there were a lot of preachers and pastors. General Flynn spoke, a range of people, to Roger Stone. There was even some music performance on the stage, but everyone there was in good spirits, was, praying together, singing the national anthem together. So it was a show of patriotism and faith and prayer for what they thought was the just outcome that they were there to achieve. The next morning, I wanted to get up early because I was really hopeful to get into the Ellipse to see Trump, and arrived at the line at about 6 a.m. And that was the first thing that really surprised me. Not that this, I'm not sure who would bear responsibility for this, but when I got there were already tens of thousands of people there at 6 a.m. on the morning of the 6th, and you couldn't even find the end of the line. I was just trying to find the end of the line, and there wasn't anyone there in any kind of capacity to help show people where the line was, maintain order in the line. The line was orderly, and it was, everyone was behaving, and there just wasn't any real. I saw maybe a couple of cops, not even near the, and I'm not sure what kind of cops they were, whether those were Capitol Police, probably D.C. Police, National Guard, or whatever they were. But I'd say at that point I saw more presence of police the prior evening at the Freedom Plaza than I did at that point. But I ended up just starting to walk the line because people had given us different direction of go that way. But clearly the line, which started on the street between the Washington Monument and the Ellipse, where there were also some porta pots set up there and some tables where people could buy merchandise, And then we just started walking the line, and then the line at that point was already 2 miles long, and it was 2 miles of people who were five people deep. So I'm not sure how many people that was at that point, but actually ended up walking about 2 miles, and then got back to the point in the line where we had begun and got in the end of the line. Waited in line for a couple of hours, which took us pretty much from that street at the back end of the ellipse all the way around the Washington Monument. And then we got back to, by the time we got back around the Washington Monument, at that point we were probably a couple hundred yards from where the Secret Service checkpoint was on the other side of that street, and the line just disappeared. Because there was another stage set up, just to explain the lay of the land. You've got the White House, back lawn, so the White House is in the distance, and then Trump stage, and then the ellipse, and then the street, and then a stage that was set up for the Women for Trump that was on the Washington Monument side of the street, and they had a planned program of speakers that was beginning at, 8 a.m. or sometime between 8 and 9 a.m. So by the time I came back, or I guess it was 8 a.m., by the time we came back around to that side of the Washington Monument, that program was beginning, and there were tens of thousands of people already, not in line, but just on the hill and on the lawn, watching the program that had started on that stage. So our line kind of disappeared into that crowd of people. And at that point, I sort of assumed that they had stopped letting people into the ellipse, and that's why there was no longer a line. So we decided to just go up on the street and try to observe Trump's speech from behind where that women's stage was on the street. So walked over there, and there were thousands of people in that street, shoulder to shoulder. So it was hard to even move around in that street. And then we managed to kind of inch our way back over to we noticed that they were still letting people into the ellipse, so we inched our way back over to what was kind of a metal barricade queue that the Secret Service had set up, and managed to get into the ellipse. Took some video in there. They were playing music. It was typical Trump rally program of playlist of songs, and people were dancing around and enjoying themselves, talking and meeting people from other states. Speaking of that, my hotel that I stayed in was the Hamilton Hotel on 14th and K, and the hotel was filled with people from all over Oregon, California, Pennsylvania. I'm from Ohio, so it was just everybody was kind of introducing themselves to each other and meeting new people, talking. And so we got in there and we watched Trump's speech, and then as we were leaving the ellipse, so that would have put me pretty much at the back end of the march back over towards the Capitol building. And, we probably walked at a little bit of a faster pace than the normal people in the crowd, but it was, having been there for the last couple of marches in D.C. that all basically went down the same route at Pennsylvania Avenue. This one went a little further because we were at the ellipse instead of Freedom Plaza. But it was a very dense crowd of people walking down Pennsylvania, way more dense than the last two marches that I'd been to. Like it was a little bit harder to try to even make your own pace or even weave your way through the crowd because it was a lot of people in the street. So we that was a little bit after 1 o'clock, and it was right around that time. Keep in mind, I think this is pretty important that, when you're at a Trump rally, you have no phone signal. And in this case, I'm not sure, it was probably a combination of that originally. In the ellipse, at least, there was no phone signal. There was no ability to get on the internet. You might get a sporadic text that managed to squeak its way through or something. But otherwise, you weren't really getting regular communications of what was going on. And in fact, I had wondered, if and the plan to stay there for up to 10 or 12 hours, how we were even going to really be able to know exactly what was going on, if someone had a radio or would be broadcasting it on a big screen over at the Capitol from C-SPAN or whatever. But didn't really get a chance for that to even become an issue or come to fruition. But on the walk over, the news started to spread of Mike Pence's press release that, sort of the main subject of of the speeches in the ellipse was, is Mike Pence going to stand with Trump and stand against election fraud and stand with the evidence and try to do something or not? And that was sort of the big question of the day, and that was basically already decided. And so, people were upset about that for sure. I didn't hear a lot of talk, and nobody really voicing much anger, but just within my own group, we weren't happy to hear that. It sort of took the wind out of our sails. I'd say it took the wind out of people's sails more than it fired them up to become more aggressive as a result of that. But walked over to the Capitol building, and as I walked up, sort of the next thing that struck me was, I had been there recently, and normally there's even, as I recall, there were even some barricades around the lawn of the Capitol. So, beyond the mall, you get past a walkway, and there's the statue of Grant, and and then you've got the lawn for the Capitol. And normally you can't walk on that, but by the time I got there were thousands of people on that, and so. We walked up onto that lawn. There was no barrier, and there were no police preventing that. So walked up to the crowd and started taking a video, and it was pretty much right about that time that the first person that I saw had run up onto the bleachers. The inauguration bleachers are set up. I'm sure everyone's seen that on the news, and ran up onto the bleachers and started waving a Trump flag up there, and the crowd sort of cheered him on. I would equate it to, it sort of had the feel of, if you're at a baseball game and somebody runs out onto the field and the crowd sort of maybe cheers the guy on a little bit. So, and frankly, I would kind of divide the day into, I guess, four basic parts in terms of the march. There was the early morning Trump speech at the Ellipse. There was the march over, and then there was what was happening on the front steps or the inauguration bleachers of the Capitol, and then there was events that went on, obviously, around the back where people, and I guess from some videos of other people that I've seen, there's probably more than one part of the story from the back, but I never went around to the Supreme Court side of the Capitol building on this trip. So, I know there were people singing national anthem and being peaceful on that side as well, in addition to people entered the Capitol building. But we saw the very first person who got up on the bleachers, and initially, frankly, it was not beyond my expectations for the day that people might fill those bleachers. I mean, there's bleachers set up. That's, to me, that's a whole nother, that's a totally different level than trying to penetrate the Capitol building, to fill up the inauguration bleachers as a form of civil disobedience. It didn't shock me, put it that way. And I think there might have been some people in that crowd on the front lawn. One thing just to back up too, because if you turned around at this point on the front lawn and look out towards the Washington Monument, you can see millions of people in the crowd. And the same was true. I sat relatively close to the stage at the Trump speech in the Ellipse, and if you turn around, it was kind of hard to get a camera shot of it. I took some and videos and photographs and panoramic so that you could try to see the scale of the crowd that had formed beyond the Ellipse and up near all the way up to the Washington Monument. But it was a massive amount of people. That's where it was just mind-blowing to see 2 million people in one place. And, that crowd had eventually sort of filled in on the mall beyond the lawn of the Capitol building. So the first guy got up on the bleachers, and then a few more people started to get up on the bleachers. And initially, the only Capitol Police presence I saw was, maybe there were, when that first guy got up there, they chased him down and tackled him, and there were maybe, I don't know, I didn't notice a huge police presence on those bleachers. So maybe a half dozen to a dozen police that were there. And they were resisting some of the people initially going onto the bleachers, and then eventually some more people started to come up after the first guy, and then they sort of just gave up at least the lower part of the bleachers and moved towards the top of the Capitol. And it's hard for me to say exactly how that evolution of the situation on the inauguration bleachers corresponded in time with when they called the session, or even when people were inside of the Capitol. But it's probably around 2:00 at this point that people really started to, or 2 or a little after 2, even 2:15 maybe, that people really started to fill up those bleachers, and eventually they got them pretty full, with the exception of the top few rows close to the building, which is where the Capitol Police had positioned themselves at that point, and basically, I guess, had made a decision, just we'll let them have the bleachers and we'll keep people off of the top rows nearest to the building, which is what they did. So I got up pretty close to the bottom of the steps of the Capitol at the front of the crowd that was on the lawn, and then went over to the, as this was all happening, one thing that I thought was, now, for the sake of argument, and as people were telling me Antifa infiltrated the crowd or whatever, I'm happy to assume that everybody there was a Trump supporter, but, I'm sure, and I've seen the videos now about people breaking glass with batons, and some of the initial people that actually breached the Capitol and went inside. But at this point in my mind that day, seeing what I saw on the side of the building that I was on, I didn't question that the people who were filling those bleachers were Trump supporters. But looking back on it, one thing that was interesting is they've got that, I guess it's a media tower, some kind of scaffolding that's in the center of the inauguration setup. And the first couple of people that scaled that, one guy had flags, and he also had a bullhorn or a megaphone, and he was really encouraging people in the crowd to take those bleachers. So much so, and in such a way that I would say, he was well trained in how he was verbally motivating people. I mean, he was calling out people individually for taking selfies, for taking pictures, and said, things like, this is not the time to be taking pictures. This isn't an Instagram photo op. Get your ass up here. And, it was like a general calling his troops into battle. Not that he was telling them to do battle or to break into the building. He was focused on getting people to fill those bleachers. And again, when I heard this guy that day, I didn't question that this guy was just, a fairly militant Trump supporter who was up there, but he was effective, and I think really well trained. It'd be interesting to know who that guy or those guys were that took that media tower and used it as a platform to really motivate people. Because I don't think, without what they were doing, I don't think as many people would have filled those bleachers. So just something reflecting on it in hindsight. So I got up pretty close to the bottom of the steps of the Capitol, and then went to the right, and there's a pathway that runs along that side of the lawn. And from what I have seen, I think in some of the video where you see people opening up barricades, you see police opening up barricades, and then a crowd of people swarming through. I think that happened on that pathway. That's what it looked like to me. But by the time I got there was no barricade, and there were a few people kind of milling around in that area, and there was some of those people. I would say there was maybe 10 or 12 people who were dressed like in almost military type gear, not police, but people who, at the time, again, I presume these are just Trump supporters, maybe veterans, and they're all kind of standing around there. I saw a couple of guys. They ranged, to the guys I thought, maybe these are some of the Oath Keepers or people who were, often you'll see that in a Trump rally or at a march where, There's people who are there trying to kind of protect the crowd, and even will intermingle themselves with the crowd as they're walking back after the event, in case they're attacked by Antifa or anything like that. So to me, that's what these guys look like. They didn't look like they were in military uniforms, like they were active duty. And frankly, I thought maybe it's a mixture of guys who are veterans who are dressed in some form of like camo type gear to, LARPer type guys who buy this type of stuff on the internet and then like to wear it and pretend to be veterans or whatever. But and most of those guys were probably mid 40s ish to even anywhere from 40 to even into their 50s maybe. But then there were a couple of them who were a little bit younger, and I saw one younger black guy who was washing, who was dressed in among those guys, who was part of that group, who was washing tear gas out of his eyes. They had a case of water there on a little corner of lawn that was on the right side of that pathway I described, and they had obviously come in contact with tear gas somewhere. I knew, I had seen some smoke and things from the people taking the bleachers. I never really knew and never personally came into contact with anything that was irritant to me. So, I assume that they came into contact with it on the bleachers. That was the first time that I did hear one of those guys, and he was also kind of teary, talking about a girl being shot. And he had, I don't know if he had seen her being brought out or what, but he was clearly shaken up. I didn't realize still at the time that he was talking about, I didn't even know that he was talking about today, frankly, because some of these guys were standing around telling stories, and I thought they might be telling stories from whenever. But you're trying to process everything and didn't have access to the internet, didn't have regular communications coming in. So you're hearing this, and I also thought maybe this was somebody toward the top of the bleachers that was, he mentioned something about being shot through a window. So I thought maybe somebody got up close to the building in the bleachers and did something to a window and was shot through the window. But still, I'm not 100% clear on any of that. And it's still have no idea that anyone might have gotten into the building. About 3:30, so probably in that area for 20 minutes or so. And about 3:30 is when we did get a notification on our phones that Mayor Bowser, that there had been a breach of the Capitol building, and that there was a 6 p.m. curfew put in place, and that the joint session was canceled as a result of this. So we started to walk back basically as soon as that notification came in, back to the hotel, and walked back across the area of the Capitol lawn, and came across a guy, probably just in there's a little parking area for the Capitol there for press and workers or whoever, and came across a guy there who was telling a story to Joshua Phillip, who I recognized immediately as the guy who had done the documentary for Epoch Times, or that was distributed by Epoch Times, about the election fraud. So I made a video of that guy telling his story, and it seemed a little odd to me, just in terms of he wasn't dressed in military clothes, but he did have some kind of chest guard on that looked a little military. So, he looked like he was more ready for action than the average person who came to the march. And he's telling a story about the girl being shot, and that he was right there and observed it in the area where she was shot, and that she was shot through a door. And he also just sort of described the way that he was describing the police is what made me feel a little bit weird about his story. And I looked at the look on Joshua Phillip's face as he was hearing the story and afterwards, and he just kind of looked, I don't know if it was shocked or skeptical of what what the guy was saying, probably a combination of just trying to process what he was hearing. I'm not sure if he knew at that point exactly what had happened or how many people had been inside or what. So I made that video, and we kept walking, and walked another 5 minutes or so back in the direction of my hotel. And at that point, I guess 3 young white men, I mean, they could have been teenagers. They could have been 18. They weren't more than 25. But they were walking behind us, and I'm not really sure what initiated the conversation. They may have mentioned something to each other about being inside the Capitol, and I kind of turned around and said, "You guys were inside the Capitol building?" So even though I had heard what I had heard up near the building and had just heard that guy Haya tell his story to Joshua Phillip, I still didn't realize that anyone was ever inside the Capitol building until this point. And at first I was skeptical of them. And I said, "How many people were inside the Capitol building?" And they said, maybe 50 people. And they said they were in a stairwell where the girl got shot. And they said they had some video from inside the Capitol building. So they started to show me a video on their phone as we were walking. And I looked at the video, and basically this video might be out there now. I don't know. I haven't seen it in the news. You've got the one video that I believe was taken by the Black Lives Matter guy, that he's close to the window on the left side of the door. And then there's like a window on the right side of the door, and in his video you can see through and see that the door had been barricaded with furniture, and that some of the glass was broken. And in his video you see some people kind of banging on the door and maybe on the windows. These kids showed me a video. Basically the stairwell has a landing in front of the door, a stairway that goes down on the right, and then I'm not really sure if there's another stairway on the left side or just a landing they're standing on, but they're back behind that camera angle and looking down at the door. And you see in their video a couple of, I guess they're Capitol Police. I don't know. They were dressed in black, almost, it looked like SWAT gear, so I think they were Capitol Police, and they had rifles, and they were on the stairway going up. And one of those 2 police officers was actually very close to the girl who was shot, the woman who was shot, and so close that, in his video, you see her kind of, almost looks like she jumps up and gets her knees onto the windowsill of that window on the right side, or almost does, and is immediately shot and then falls down. But the police officer who was on this side of the door with the girl was so close to her that it looked to me in this video that I was watching like he could have easily been shot by the bullet that hit her, because it was like he almost had his hands on her at the point when she was shot. He was certainly, or appeared to be, within arm's reach at that point. So this guy's showing me this video on the street when I'm probably 5 minutes more walk from my hotel, and that's the first time in the whole day that I was aware that anyone was inside the Capitol building. And the vast majority of the 2 or 3 million people who were there to protest and march were much further away from the Capitol building than I was. I mean, I was relatively close to the action in terms of hearing what was going on the ground. And, I also never went around to the sides of the building, never went around to the back of the building. May have done all that if the day had played out differently and we had been there for 10 or 12 hours, but we're only at the Capitol building for about an hour or 90 minutes or so, and sort of looking around the crowd and taking videos at the size of the crowd that was there. So at that point, I'm pretty shocked. But it was also shocking. Maybe it shouldn't be shocking that these are the kids who were telling me this story, who were in the stairwell where a woman was shot, look like frat boys. I mean, and again, I don't question that they're Trump supporters still, and didn't at the moment, because there's all types. But they didn't strike me as similar or representative to the other people that were in our hotel. And I don't mean that as, I'm not questioning that they were Trump supporters. I'm just saying they were young, stupid people, who look like they might have just come from a frat party and were pre-gaming. And then I could imagine, in hindsight now, looking back at the way that some people were let into the building, that these were the types of stupid people that would follow a crowd of people into the Capitol building. Because, it was beyond my comprehension that someone would go into the Capitol building at all. Even if invited, I wouldn't have done that. And my expectation would be, if you tried to breach the Capitol building, that you would get a sniper bullet, between your eyes, especially with 2 million people outside. So that's hard to imagine, and it was hard to imagine even as I was hearing people and seeing video evidence that they were in it. So my mouth was sort of agape. But then went back to our hotel and basically kind of took in the rest of the events, and I think as they came back into session that night. But the other thing is, when I got back to my hotel, I had a couple of messages from friends and family that were like, "I can't believe you would take part in this. It's I'm embarrassed to be in your family, that you're there." And I'm thinking, what did I take part in? I mean, I was there and did exactly what I went there to. Well, I didn't get to do exactly what I went there to do, because we wanted to be there observing 10 to 12 hours of debate on evidence. So we didn't get to do that. So my big takeaway, just based on that, because I'm also sure that there were probably thousands of people who went to that march to support the president, and received similar messages like that from family, or watched the representations of what was happening there on the news themselves, and went home apologizing about being there. And I can't help but think that if we look at what I talked about what my goals were for that day, but I mean, I think that the other side, whatever the hell the other side is, if that's the establishment, Republicans, Democrats, call it the deep state, whatever, that have been lying for 5 years, their objectives were to certify this electoral vote for Biden, and to limit the amount of debate that was going to go on and the exposure of that evidence to light, and also to erode support for Donald Trump, and to shame the people that were there to support him, or the people that support him who weren't there. Maybe even more so, because they didn't have the necessarily the ability to evaluate things that they saw for themselves on the ground. They're relying on the media reports, and the media is reporting that, the Capitol was stormed. And the Capitol wasn't stormed because there were 2 or 3 million people there. If there were 2 or 3 million people there and they wanted to take over the Capitol building, they would have done it. They could have done it. It was a massive group of people. It was a huge group of people. It was like 1% of the population. I mean, they could have overrun the amount of police if that was what they wanted to do, if that was, they were following the inspiration of Trump, and that was the objective, that was not the objective. That was not what the majority of the crowd was there to do. That was not what the majority of people there did. And the vast majority of 3 million people were totally unaware of what was going on in these pockets, whatever went on in these pockets, whether that was somehow coordinated to create this narrative or whether it was, I'm perfectly happy to accept that there were probably thousands of people in that crowd who were incredibly angry and maybe had training, military training or police training, who might have gone there with some sort of more aggressive, more violent intention. So even if that is the case and they were Trump supporters, it still doesn't define the 2 or 3 million people, and it also doesn't mean that it still wasn't a created narrative by allowing some people to get inside of that building, and that becomes the image on the news, and other people trying to smash windows with batons, who were shouted down as being Antifa by the crowd, and in fact physically tackled in at least one or two videos that I've seen of those instances. And I don't know if anyone ever went in through a window that was smashed, or if that was just, another video, and that did the people who got to that stairwell go in through the front door, as most of the people that went in did, or did they go in through some other entrance? I don't know the answer to that. But I know that there are basics of crowd control, and it seems, it wasn't an unroutine type of thing for a large crowd to be protesting. Certainly was unusual of the crowd of this size, but my point is that in recent weeks there's been 2 other Trump marches that weren't tiny, that each were probably 500,000 to 1 million people, and we marched to the Supreme Court on the first march for Trump in November, and at that march it was December 12th, the December 12th march. At that march there was a heavy presence of police on the steps of the Supreme Court, heavy military-looking presence on the steps behind the podium that was set up there by Stop the Steal to give their speeches. And I didn't see anything like that. Maybe around the other side of the building, I've seen some videos that show people where they had, a presence of SWAT gear, police kind of at the bottom of the steps in a line. But even that was, I don't even think, as I recall, that the presence in front of the Supreme Court at the previous march was more significant than that. So, my point is that the way that the security was set up to incrementally sort of allow people to get where they were able to get, first onto the lawn, then onto the stairs. And again, I didn't observe firsthand what went on in the back of the building, but just, it created certain visuals, and it created a situation that would have allowed people to get into the building. So that's my story. Feel free to discuss anything or ask any questions in the comments. But I just wanted to save myself the time of repeating the story. And my overall takeaway is that the other side played their hand perfectly, and they got the outcome that they wanted, and we got played. That's the way that I see it. So thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you all later.